understandable. Russian nationalism has been one of the few cohesive forces in the society. No nation, I know no other nation that has been exposed to so many bizarre and cruel rulers in succession as Russia has had over the centuries. And therefore, I think Zhirinovsky's words and the nationalism he represents is not created by him. Secondly, I believe that the current Russian government is also pursuing a nationalist, maybe less nationalist policy, which I define as an attempt to have a military presence in all the neighboring states of the former Soviet Union and a gradual elaboration of a veto over all the countries of the former Warsaw Pact. And I would argue that American foreign policy should concentrate on Russian foreign policy and leave social engineering to the people in Moscow. And that therefore, while I have absolutely no use for Zhirinovsky, the message we should have for all Russian leaders is, if you stay within your borders, which have 11 time zones, so you shouldn't suffer claustrophobia, we can have a very good and creative relationship. If you engage in expansion, we will have to oppose you. Not necessarily by force, certainly not by force everywhere, but you will pay a price in American relations. I think this should be the basis of our foreign policy and not these endless discussions of do we back Gaida, do we back some other person, what is our approach to particular acts of the Bank of Russia. It is not a question of personalities, it's a question of structure.
Secretary Kissinger, you have a very generous statement to the Foreign Service at the beginning of your book, which I read with a great deal of interest. And I recalled, after reading a section of the book that is dedicated to the so-called Cambodian incursion, when the president felt obliged to move troops into Cambodia during the Vietnamese War. This is about the time you had already become Secretary of State, and a member of this club, Clark Mullinoff, a Pulitzer Prize winner, was the ombudsman, focused on a group of several hundred Foreign Service officers who signed a petition opposing the president's incursion into Cambodia. They sent it to the New York Times, they gave it to you, they wanted it published, they wanted it made public, but I was told myself by Clark Mullinoff that you refused to give him a copy of this petition when he asked for it to investigate in the matter for the president. Did you withhold that document because you approved of the behavior of these Foreign Service officers, and did their behavior comport with your dedication to the Foreign Service, dedicated...
Just a minute. First of all, I wasn't Secretary of State.
Well, head of the NSC then.
Well, the idea that if there was a document signed by 700 Foreign Service officers that Clark Mullinoff couldn't get a hold of is absurd. And the idea that Clark Mullinoff would come to me and ask me for the document as if I were the only keeper of that document, I actually don't remember that incident, and I don't remember this document, but surely the Washington press corps can get a document that 700 dissident Foreign Service officers have signed, and I would not spend sleepless. Now I'll give you my answer what I think about the Foreign Service officers.
Of course. The question is,
I will now answer your question.
Did you
I will answer the second part of your question.
Yes,
the first part of your question, the factual premise happened to be wrong, but I will nevertheless answer the conclusions you draw from your wrong premise, which is this. I admire the Foreign Service as a disciplined instrument of American foreign policy. They're the ablest people that I have been associated with, and if they disagree with the policy of the Secretary of State and the President, they should say so to the Secretary of State and the President. If they want to agitate outside, they should leave the Foreign Service. It is not the function of the Foreign Service to conduct opposition to the administration. Anybody who resigns from the Foreign Service under those conditions will have my respect. But I dedicated this book to the Foreign Service because it is an able group, it is a dedicated group, and if properly led, it will enable the Secretary and the President to achieve any rational objective. I did not dedicate it to the to them if they think that all of them are Secretaries of State, and if they disagree with the Secretary of State, they then can go to the press. Then they should leave the Foreign Service.
May I ask one short follow-up question?
No, we've got a lot of people here.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
I've answered that
we'll move
question. Well, go ahead.
As an aside, I apologize for missing the date on your becoming Secretary of State, but it seems to me when you were sworn in, you were asked the question, when did you first feel like the Secretary of State? And the press reported, about 4 years ago. This is when you were NSC head.
You know, I've been accused of many things, but not of being totally stupid. And I don't think that I cannot preclude that I'm capable of unworthy thoughts, but I hope I'm not so idiotic as to make such a statement. And I don't think you will find such a statement in the record. I mean, after all, what I said, my press conferences were readily available, and you can research them.
Dr. Kissinger, you said during your talk, and you reiterated in your answer to the second question, that Americans tend to exaggerate the importance of leaders' personalities, national leaders' personalities. However, you also pointed out that America is unique in a number of ways. Right. And today, particularly with the importance of television in our electoral system, there are some who might say that we're approaching a charismocracy. You have to appeal. With all these things in mind, could you imagine yourself as the advisor to another nation's government? Would you say the same thing to them, or do you think that leadership personality in this country, in the person of the President, is perhaps more important in determining what America's foreign policy actions will be regardless of national interest?
No, I would make, you have to distinguish two things. One is, does a great leader make a difference? Of course. You can't imagine American history without Lincoln. It would certainly have been different without Wilson, without Franklin Roosevelt. I don't believe anyone else could have led America into war in 1941 the way Franklin Roosevelt did in the period between 1937 and 41. Nor can I imagine France without de Gaulle or Britain without Churchill. So certainly, leaders make a big difference. What I'm arguing against is to say we have a problem with this country. And if we either support the leader or remove the leader, it will solve the fundamental problem with that country. That I do not believe. And this is what I am reacting to identify foreign policy with getting ourselves involved in the domestic policies of other societies to an extraordinary degree. Yes, sir.
Dr. Kissinger, in your comments, you spoke very little about the role of U.S. foreign policy in respect to the United Nations.
Right.
I wondered if you might comment in two respects, whether it would be possible or appropriate for the United States, as part of its foreign policy, to make greater use of offices of the United Nations, either in the settlement of political affairs or in the economic development in other countries?
See, I have a terrific alibi because Sandy only gave me 20 minutes, so I couldn't cover every subject. So you'll never know whether I could have if I had. But dealing with the United Nations, there is a school of thought in the United States that believes one should strengthen the United Nations, and that in time the United Nations could become something like a world government, and that you could have an international police force that substitutes for national forces. This I do not believe is possible in the present circumstances, though maybe in 50 to 100 years it could become more possible. On the other hand, I believe that the United Nations can be very useful on a whole host of social, technical, economic, global problems, environment, population, a whole communications. In addition, the United Nations can provide a forum for the exchange of ideas that would be very difficult to construct under normal circumstances. And it can also provide for an international consensus when one exists, such as in the Gulf War, and hopefully on nuclear proliferation to Korea. The only thing that I believe is not possible at this time, is to multilateralize decisions of war and peace. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you very much for coming to Washington this evening. I think we all would be better off if we came to Washington more often. On that note,
You're trying to break up my marriage. Thank you.
what, if any, parallels do you see between the Clinton administration's so-called partnership for peace and the abandonments of Eastern Europe in the 1930s prior to World War II? And on that, sort of related to that, do you think that we are entering a neo-isolationist period?
Well, I know you all read every article I write, so you will know that I have been strongly opposed to the Partnership for Peace because it creates infinitely more problems than it solves. The problem that one attempted to deal with is that the countries like Poland, especially Poland, but also the Czech Republic and Slovakia and Hungary, countries that either have borders with the former Soviet Union or would have borders with Russia if it regained control over its near abroad territories, which is what it wants. And the administration held the view that we must not create a new dividing line in Europe, and therefore grouped the countries of Eastern Europe, terrified of Russia, together with Russia, Uzbekistan, and all other former republics of the former Soviet Union into one great structure called a Partnership of Peace. It meant that the lamb was grouped together with the wolf in a peace partnership. And secondly, it was impossible to describe what these countries were going to do together. At a meeting, at a press conference with President Nazarbayev from Kazakhstan, President Clinton was asked what Kazakhstan was going to do in the Partnership for Peace. And he said, we're going to group together NATO, Warsaw Pact, former Soviet republics, and the neutrals into one big enterprise that can engage in joint military planning. For what? What are they going to plan for? Against what enemy? And if one implies that at some point Russia can join NATO, it means that all the existing protections of NATO disappear, because NATO is designed against aggression from outside of